How do intervals work? If you have ever wondered how intervals work in music, I'm going to answer that question today. Hi, I'm Jenny from the Musical Homestead. In today's theory lesson, we're going to answer the question, how do intervals work? This lesson is geared towards the 6th grade through adult student. If you're in kindergarten through 5th grade and you want to know how intervals work, you need our elementary theory track, and I'm going to link that in the description below. If you've been following along with us during our theory journey, we are in the preparatory level with our textbook, The Fundamentals of Piano Theory. And if you want to join us, I'm going to link that in the description below. We're on Unit 5, and that's on page 24. We are learning about intervals today, and we're going to answer that important question, how do intervals work? So let's get started. First, before we answer that question, we have to define what an interval is. An interval is the distance between two notes. Today, we are going to be learning about seconds, thirds, and fourths. And in the future, we'll be learning about more of those intervals. That is the size of the interval, the distance between the two notes. In future lessons, we will be learning about the quality of the interval. Is it major, minor, diminished, augmented? But that's for a later lesson. Today, we're going to learn about the size of some of these intervals. A second or a step is one note away from the given note. One letter name. So here's our example on the piano. C to D, that is a second or a step. I went from C right up to the next note in our musical alphabet to D. Here's another example, A to B, that's another example of our second or our step. And the last one I have is E to F, which is another example of our second or our step. On the piano, when I'm going from one letter name to the next letter name, that is going to be our second or our step. On the musical staff, we write it a little bit differently. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about these two words up here, melodic and harmonic. Melodic, if you can see in there, you can kind of see the word melody. When I sing my favorite song or my favorite melody, I sing one note at a time. I know I can't sing more than one note at a time. So a melody is one note at a time. When I am writing a melodic interval, I am going to write one note and then the next note. They're not going to be played together. They're not going to be sang together. They're going to be one at a time. When I do a harmonic interval, I'm going to do them together. Now in here, we can kind of see the word harmony. Harmony would be if my friend and I got together and we sang at the same time. We're singing two different notes at the exact same time. That is harmony, and that is also a harmonic interval. And you can tell they're kind of glued together. We're doing them at the exact same time. Now, to figure out how this is a second, I have to remember my pattern, line note, space note, line note, space note, line note, space note, goes all the way up. When I go from a line note to a space note, that is a second. So I go 1, 2. You could also say it's stepping, and in this case, stepping up. So 1, 2, stepping up from a line to the next space. The one other thing I wanted to point out is with intervals, they will tell you, first of all, what the size needs to be. If it's a second, or we'll learn about thirds, fourths, and fifths, they will ask you to say, is it a melodic or a harmonic interval? And you have to say that or write it. They will also ask you to go above or below the given note. What that means is the first note is your given note. If they say above, you want to remember when I go up on the staff, that means above. Higher, so I would go there. If they say below or lower, in this case, this note would not be here. It would be on this first space of the staff. Having the notes go up or higher, I'm going to go above in my pattern, and having the notes go lower, I'm going to go below, which would be here. Now we're going to move on to the next interval, which is going to be a third or a skip. It has two different names. When I look at my piano, I go from C to E. If I call it a third, C is my first note, that's my 1. 1, 2, 3. E then becomes my third note. It's the third note above C. That's my interval, that is a third, C to E. G, if G is my 1, I go 1, 2, 3. B is the third note, so G to B, that is my third. If you look at this, you're also going to notice that I am skipping the letter name or the note name in between these two. So I go C, I skip D, and then I go to E. So that's why we can call this a third or a skip, because we are skipping the note in between. When we come down to the musical staff, we have a really cool thing happening. When we have a third, we go from a space note to a space note, or a line note to a line note. remembering that our pattern goes line, space, line, space, line. I go 1 here, I skip the line, which is 2, and then 3 is the space here. So 1, skip the line for 2, and then 3. This becomes our third. Same thing over here, 1, skip the space for 2, and then 3 becomes the line. Remembering our definition of melodic versus harmonic, melodic being 1 note at a time as a melody, harmonic, 2 notes you're playing at the exact same time. I wanted to take a second to point out this looks a little bit different than our second did. In our second, our notes were right next to each other but not underneath each other. And that is because you cannot stack them on top of each other for a second. They're too close. When we do our third, we want our notes to be directly on top of each other, telling us as piano players that we need to play those notes at the exact same time. Really make sure when you line them up, you are lining them up directly on top of each other. I also wanted to point out I'm using whole notes in this example. You could use half notes, you could use quarter notes, you could use any kind of notes, but I chose to use whole notes. Now we've done seconds and thirds, so that means it's time for fourths. For fourths, I've gone ahead and I've written some numbers out here, and I want to explain to you my thinking behind this and the process behind this. C is the first note we've been given, and the question would be, what is a fourth above C? We always remember that our first note is going to be our 1. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Our interval of a fourth above C is going to be an F. Over here, A is our first note we've been given. That's going to be a 1. We go 1, 2, 3, 4. D is our fourth, and that's our interval above A. So A to D is a fourth. I also want to point out, like we did our thirds and our skips, there was a note in between. That's how we knew it was a skip. Here, when we do our fourths, we have 2 notes that are going to be in between, and we're playing the outer notes. When we come down to the musical staff, I've gone ahead and I've used our numbers again. We're going to use the same pattern, space, line, space, line, space. Our first note is going to be 1, that's on a space. Line is 2, space is 3, line is 4. So when we go from this note to this note, that is going to be our fourth. Remembering melodic means 1 note at a time. When we do harmonic, they are lined up, and now we're starting on this line note, so we have 1, 2 for the space, 3 for the line, 4 for the space. This is our fourth over here, harmonic, lined up. I want you to start noticing patterns. It's really important with intervals when it comes time to playing them that you recognize patterns. When we did thirds, a third always went from a line to a line or a space to a space. When we do fourths, we go from a line to a space or a space to a line, and we're kind of skipping this space. So it's not the exact next space, but it's 2 spaces up. Same thing over here. This space to a line is not going to be a line that's right next to it, but it's the line that's 1, 2 up. You want to get used to seeing this pattern and immediately recognizing it's a fourth. That's going to help you play it faster on the piano. The last interval we're going to talk about today is a fifth. We're going to count them together, so feel free to count with me. We're going to start with our C. We're going to go a fifth above C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A fifth above C is going to be G. Let's do the same thing up here with D. So a fifth above D, starting with D as 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A becomes our fifth. So D to A is our fifth. Now down here, when we come to our melodic versus our harmonic, we're going to do our counting. Remember our pattern, space, line, space, line. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is an A, and a fifth above A is going to be E. And our harmonic, meaning they're lined up, we're doing them at the same time. We have our space here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So F to C is going to be our fifth. Can you tell me of the other intervals that we learned today, which interval went from a space to a space or a line to a line? It was a third or a skip. I want you to start memorizing that. Thirds and fifths both go from space to space and line to line. Remembering that our fifth is going to go space, almost skip a space to another space. Our third would be space, and then the note would be right here, and this would be gone. So it would be space to space, and that would be our third. Our second and our fourths, those go from line to space or space to line. The more we get those patterns stuck in our head, the easier it is to read music as we're looking at it and play it quickly. Now you know the answer to the question, how do intervals work? Today we answered that question and we learned a lot of really good information as well. There's more information to learn about intervals, and you can check those out in the other interval videos that are here at the Homestead. It's your turn to learn about intervals and to get better at intervals, so I want to give you some assignments. The first assignment I have for you is to get your music out and to look for intervals. You're going to see them all throughout your music. Music is made of intervals. It's the foundation for music. I want you to find your harmonic intervals, your melodic intervals, and the seconds, thirds, and fourths that you can find. So I want you to go ahead and check those out in your music. Next, if you've been following along in our textbook, I want you to do the pages in the textbook, and I want you to make sure that you read the directions and follow them completely. They're very specific. You got to make sure you're doing that. I'm also going to link in the description below these flashcards. In the pink section, there are some interval flashcards, and those would be a great addition for your library and your resources. If you've been around the Homestead at all, you know I like to create games and activities that are going to help you get better at what the concept is we're working on. And so I have some theory activities, and I'm going to link those in the description below. Check those out. The more you practice intervals, the better you're going to get at it. If you're new to the Homestead, or you haven't done it already, do me a big favor, click the subscribe button and turn the bell on so you don't miss any of our fun games and activities. Give me a thumbs up, I would appreciate that. All of that helps me to create more content for you. Until I see you next time, remember, have fun learning music.